Admiral Keth had the best intelligence file on the Concordance's 7th Fleet that money, espionage, and for months of obsessive preparation could produce. It was 412 pages. It covered the 7th Fleet's vessel complement in exhaustive detail, every ship's class, age, armament, shield rating, drive, capacity, and maintenance history. It covered the fleet's tactical doctrine, which the Keth Intelligence Division had reverse-engineered from 11 engagements over 3 years. It covered the fleet's supply situation, its patrol patterns, its communication protocols, its command structure down to the 4th echelon. It covered, in a 40-page section that Keth had personally commissioned, the psychological profiles of every senior officer in the fleet. The psychological profiles were the part he was most proud of. Most fleet commanders, in his experience, prepared for the ships. He prepared for the people. Ships were predictable. Ships did what their specifications permitted. People had histories, habits, stress responses, decision patterns that were more predictable than they believed and more exploitable than they knew. He had read every profile 3 times. He had built his entire operational plan around those profiles. The plan was, by his own assessment and the assessment of his staff, excellent. His staff had told him this on a Tuesday. He had launched the operation on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, he had discovered that the plan had one problem. The problem was page 247. Page 247 was the psychological profile of Fleet Captain Elena Vasquez Nakamura, commanding officer of the CSS Meridian and, according to the Fleet Order of Battle, the second-ranking officer in the 7th Fleet's tactical command structure. Page 247 was 3 paragraphs long. 3 paragraphs was not enough space to understand Elena Vasquez Nakamura. And Keth had not understood this until Thursday morning when she had done something that none of his 412 pages had prepared him for. He was thinking about those 3 paragraphs now, from inside an engagement that was not going the way any of his 412 pages had described. He was thinking, specifically, about the sentence on page 247 that said, "Subject demonstrates non-standard tactical decision-making. Recommend further research." Recommend further research. He had not done further research. He had moved on to page 248. He would remember this decision for the rest of his career. The 7th Fleet had been Keth's objective for months. Not because the 7th Fleet was the Concordance's strongest fleet. It wasn't. It was a mid-tier operational deployment, 23 vessels, assigned to Outer Reaches patrol and response. It was not the fleet the Concordance would send if it was trying to win a decisive engagement. It was the fleet that was between Keth and the Pellucid Corridor. The Pellucid Corridor was the strategic objective. Control the corridor, control the supply lines to the Outer Reaches settlements. And the Concordance's position in the region became untenable without a resource, commitment it had shown, repeatedly, it was unwilling to make. The 7th Fleet was the obstacle. Keth had 41 vessels. The 7th Fleet had 23. The force ratio was in his favor. The question was not whether he could defeat the 7th Fleet. The question was how to defeat it with minimum cost and maximum speed, before the Concordance could reinforce. The answer was in the psychology profiles. Fleet Admiral Humans Are Space Orcs was, by the profile, a methodical commander. He made decisions slowly and correctly. He did not take risks without significant analysis. His strength was in planned operations with clear objectives. His weakness was in rapidly evolving situations that required improvisation. The plan was designed to create rapidly evolving situations. Specifically, a 3-axis simultaneous engagement that would fragment the fleet's tactical coherence, force Mensa say to improvise, and produce the decision paralysis that the profile predicted. It was a good plan. It worked on Fleet Admiral Mensace exactly as designed. The problem was that Fleet Admiral Mensace was not the officer who responded to the three-axis engagement. At 0612, 11 minutes into the engagement, Admiral Mensace's command vessel took a hit to the primary communications array. The hit was not the result of Keth's plan. It was the result of one of his frigate captains making a targeting decision that deviated from the operational plan, which Keth filed mentally under problems to address after the engagement and put aside. The communications hit took Mensace's command vessel off the fleet tactical network for 14 minutes. In those 14 minutes, by the command protocol that the 7th Fleet's order of battle specified, tactical command of the fleet devolved to the second-ranking tactical officer. Page 247. Keth knew this had happened because the fleet's response pattern changed at 0613, not dramatically. Not in any single decision that would have been visible in isolation. In the texture of the response, the way the fleet's 23 vessels moved and fired and coordinated, which Keth was watching from the command center of his flag vessel with the attention of someone who had spent for months learning what he was watching. He noticed the change at 0614. He could not immediately characterize what had changed. He pulled up the fleet's communication traffic analysis, which was one of the tools his intelligence had built for exactly this kind of real-time monitoring. The traffic analysis showed that at 0613, the command traffic that had been flowing from Mensace's vessel had stopped and had been replaced by command traffic from a different source, the CSS Meridian. He pulled up page 247. Subject, Captain Elena Vasquez Nakamura. Age, 38. Prior postings, Outer Reaches Patrol 3 years, Fleet Tactical Staff 2 years. Current command CSS Meridian 14 months. Academic record, distinguished. Command record, solid. Non-standard tactical decision-making. Recommend further research. He looked at the 3 paragraphs for the first time since he had read them for months ago and moved on to page 248. He should have done further research. The first thing Vasquez Nakamura did when tactical command devolved to her was nothing. Specifically, she did nothing for 90 seconds. Keth watched this in the communication traffic. The traffic dropped significantly. Not to zero. The fleet's tactical coordination continued, but the command traffic from the Meridian was minimal for 90 seconds. He had seen this before in other engagements. A command transition under fire produced a period of uncertainty as the new commander assessed the situation and made initial decisions. The 90 seconds was that assessment period. He was wrong. Vasquez Nakamura was not assessing the situation. She was letting his plan finish, not because she didn't have responses. Because the 3-axis engagement was 90 seconds from reaching its designed peak pressure point. And peak pressure points revealed the assumptions that the design was built on, and assumptions that were revealed were assumptions that could be inverted. She had understood this in the first 14 seconds after command devolved to her. She had spent the remaining 7 to 6 seconds confirming that her understanding was correct. At 90 seconds, the 3-axis engagement reached its peak pressure point. The pressure point was the moment where Keth's plan required the 7th Fleet's response to follow one of 2 patterns, both of which his plan had prepared for. Pattern A was a defensive consolidation that would leave his flanking element free to press the corridor approach. Pattern B was an aggressive counterattack that would expose the fleet's rear to his reserve element. Both patterns were in the profile for Mensace. Neither of them was what happened. Vasquez Nakamura did something that was not in the profile for Mensace because the profile for Mensace had been built on Mensace's decision history. What she did was specific, and I will describe it precisely because precision is what it required. She split the 7th Fleet into 2 groups, not evenly. 13 vessels in one group, 10 in the other. The 13-vessel group did pattern a defensive consolidation, exactly what Threxketh's plan had prepared for. His flanking element began the corridor approach exactly as designed. The 10-vessel group did neither pattern A nor pattern B. The 10-vessel group went somewhere that Threxketh's plan had not assigned a response to. They went around. Not around the engagement, around his formation. A wide arc, at maximum drive, that took them outside his formation's sensor coverage. That took them to a position that he had not assessed as tactically relevant. Because no ship operating under the pressure parameters of the current engagement should have had the drive margin to reach it. The 10-vessel group had the drive margin because Vasquez Nakamura had identified, in 90 seconds of watching his plan execute, that his formation was operating at higher power than necessary in the first two axes, which meant his reserve element was drawing less power than its allocation, which meant his reserve element's sensor coverage had a gap at the formation's far flank. The gap was real. He had not seen it. His plan had not accounted for it because the plan had been built on the assumption that no fleet commander under three-axis engagement pressure would have the attention to find a gap in the formation's sensor coverage at the far flank. Vasquez Nakamura had found it in 90 seconds. The 10 vessels emerged from the arc at 0638. They were behind his reserve element. Threxketh spent 8 seconds processing what his sensors were showing him. 8 seconds was a long time in a tactical engagement. He spent it because the sensors were showing him something that his 412-page file had not predicted and his 4 months of preparation had not produced a response to. And he needed those 8 seconds to confirm that what he was seeing was real before he committed to a response. It was real. He had 41 vessels. He had deployed them in 3 engagement axes with a reserve element. The reserve element was now in a position where it was between the 10-vessel flanking group behind it and the 13-vessel consolidated group in front of it. The reserve element was surrounded by a fleet that had 23 vessels against his 41. He had been running this engagement for 26 minutes, and he had turned his reserve element into a liability. He opened the channel to his tactical staff. He said, "How?" His tactical officer said, "Sir." He said, "How did she get those 10 vessels to that position without our sensors flagging the movement?" His tactical officer ran the analysis. He said, "She used the first axis engagement debris field for concealment on the initial arc. Then she used the power differential in our reserve element's allocation. Our reserve was drawing 16% below its sensor coverage requirement because the engagement axes were performing above projection." Threxketh said, "She saw our power allocation." His tactical officer said, "The power differential is visible in the formation sensor signature. It's a secondary reading." He paused. "You have to be looking for it specifically." Threxketh said, "She was looking for it in 90 seconds. His tactical officer said, "She appears to have been, sir, yes." He looked at the tactical display. His reserve element was surrounded. His flanking element's corridor approach had been designed for a fleet in defensive consolidation. And the 7th Fleet was not in defensive consolidation anymore. The 13-vessel group that had consolidated was consolidating toward a vector that was going to intercept his flanking element at the corridor approach point. His plan had not prepared for any of this. His plan had prepared for Mensa Se. He pulled Juan Maricimi. Non-standard tactical decision-making. He stared at that phrase. He had spent for months learning how Mensa Se made decisions. He had spent those same for months not learning how Vasquez Nakamura made decisions. Because she was not the fleet commander, and because 3 paragraphs had not told him enough to know he should investigate further. And because he had moved on to page 248, he said, "Open a channel to the Concordance fleet." His communications officer said, "Sir," he said, "open the channel." The channel opened, he said. CSS Meridian. This is Admiral Keth. I'd like to speak with whoever is currently commanding the 7th Fleet. A voice came back in approximately 4 seconds. It said, Admiral Keth. Captain Vasquez Nakamura, CSS Meridian, Acting Fleet Commander. What can I do for you? He said, I have a tactical situation that I'd like to discuss. She said, you have a reserve element in an untenable position and a flanking element approaching an objective that is no longer undefended. He said, she said, and you'd like to discuss alternatives to continuing the engagement on those terms. He said, yes. She said, I'm available for that conversation. She paused. I'd suggest we start with what you actually want from the pellucid corridor, because I suspect it's not what your operational plan was designed to achieve. He said, what makes you say that? She said, the operational plan was designed by someone who studied our fleet for several months and didn't study me at all. She paused. That's a significant investment of time in an approach that suggests the goal is not a fight. He paused. People who want a fight study their opponents. People who want an outcome study the obstacle between them and the outcome. He was quiet for a moment. She said, you studied our ships. You studied our admiral. You built a plan to move our fleet out of the corridor. He paused. What you wanted was always the corridor. She paused. The fleet was the obstacle. He said, that's a reasonable summary. She said, then let's talk about the corridor. She paused. I have a conversation with Admiral Mensah to have first. His communications are back in approximately 6 minutes. I'd like him to be part of this. She paused. She said, Admiral Keth, while we wait something. He said, yes. She said, the plan, for months of preparation. It was well constructed. She paused. The reserve element power allocation gap, that was a genuine opportunity. You didn't create it deliberately. He said, no, it was a deviation by a subordinate element. She said, but the rest was deliberate. He said, yes. She said, you should have looked at page 247 longer. He said, what? She said, whatever your intelligence file had on me. It was short. She paused. I know because you moved your reserve element in exactly the way someone would who had spent a lot of time on Mensah and not much time on me. He was quiet. She said, I'm not saying this to be difficult. I'm saying it because it's a useful lesson and because you seem like someone who finds useful lessons useful. He said, how did you know what my file had on you? She said, I didn't. She paused. But I know what I would have found if I'd built the file. She paused. Not much. I haven't done anything dramatic enough to fill a page. She paused. I've been building toward things that don't show well in a record until they happen. He said, like today. She said, like today. She paused. The thing about non-standard tactical decision-making is that it doesn't produce a pattern you can study. That's what makes it non-standard. She paused. You can't prepare for it from the record. You'd have had to watch me think. He said, I didn't have access to that. She said, no. She paused. Nobody does. Usually. She paused. Admiral Mensah communicates. Please, hold the engagement position. He said, holding. He sat in his command center and looked at the tactical display and thought about for months of preparation and 412 pages and 3 paragraphs on page 247 that had said clearly enough that there was more here than 3 paragraphs could contain. He had moved on to page 248. He thought about this for the 6 minutes he held the engagement position. He had learned a great deal about the 7th Fleet. He should have learned about its captain. The corridor negotiation took 3 days. It produced a transit agreement that gave the Keth access to specific commercial shipping lanes through the corridor under monitoring protocols, which was not what Keth's operational plan had been designed to achieve, but which was, on reflection, more useful. He filed his operational report on the 4th day. In the section marked Lessons Learned, he wrote more than he had written in any previous report. The last paragraph said, "Intelligence preparation that focuses exclusively on the named commander and documented assets produces a model with a specific and exploitable gap. Command transitions, casualties, and tactical devolution are normal features of engagements. The officer who assumes command in those transitions is as operationally significant as the named commander. In some cases, more so." He paused. He added, in this case, significantly more so. He submitted the report. He also, on the same day, submitted a formal request to the Keth Intelligence Division for a comprehensive psychological and tactical profile on Captain Elena Vasquez Nakamura of the CSS Meridian. The request noted, previous profile was 3 paragraphs. Recommend 30 pages minimum. The Intelligence Division acknowledged the request. They would not finish the profile before she was promoted to Admiral, at which point it needed to be longer still.